Dear ladies and gentlemen.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, коллеги, приветствую вас на пресс-конференции министра иностранных дел России господина Лаврова.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your interest towards our view on international affairs, towards the interests of the UNGA and the participation of the Russian delegation in it. As usual, we had very extensive agenda, several dozen meetings with heads of state and government, with foreign ministers, and naturally a meeting with the UN Secretary General, with the chairman of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly, and traditional contact between P5. We also had meetings with BRICS and CSTO, as well as Middle Eastern Quartet. This session is taking place in a complex situation. I won't be talking into detail about that. There are many unsettled crises and conflicts. The issues in global politics and economics are not becoming any less prevalent. And today, in our presentation, we tried to give our reasoning for such not a very optimistic situation. We try to analyze the concept that our Western colleagues are promoting so actively, the so-called rules-based order, and to take a look at how this concept is in line with universal and universally recognized, agreed upon norms of international law. As we think, it's not in line with law, and sometimes it even contradicts. So we'll strive for all countries to go back to the respect of the UN Charter, as well as other norms and principles of universal international law. And in this work, in this view, I'd like to assure you we have a lot of like-minded allies. This year, the opening of this session, of the 74th session, coincided with our chairmanship at the Security Council, and the chief meeting was our meeting dedicated to cooperation of UN with CSTO, as well as Shanghai Cooperation Organization and Commonwealth of Independent States in fight against terrorism. We also held one more ministerial meeting of the UN Security Council. Yesterday, we held a discussion dedicated to strengthening peace and security in Africa that we have organized together with 3 African members of the Council. I think both events were quite useful. That allowed us to outline, in the first case, additional opportunities that could be implemented in order to efficiently fight against terrorism using the potential of regional associations. And the second event indeed highlighted once again that the African issues are prevalent on the UN Security Council agenda. And in our work, we need to ensure the principle of African solutions to African issues. For the African to use their experience, their practice themselves, and to use to find solutions, to find compromise between conflicting parties in this or that country, in that or this part of Africa. I believe that the discussion that has taken place overall during the high-level segment of General Assembly has reiterated once again that the key to fast and efficient response of humanity to overall threats that are common for all of us, the key to that is the central coordinating role of the UN. With all its deficiencies, there is nothing more reliable than this organization. Humanity did not think of something else, and I believe that there is no alternative to it in the future. I'm prepared to answer your questions, please.
Благодарю вас, благодарю господин министр иностранных дел за то, что вы пришли сюда в зал, и от имени нашей ассоциации признательны за конференцию. Вопрос относительно Ирана. Как вы считаете, как воспринимается ситуация после Генассамблеи, будущее и американо-иранские отношения? Если вы позволите, в своем выступлении вы упоминали российский план в отношении залива. Он по-прежнему находится на столе на рассмотрении. Обсуждали вы в ходе заседания в ООН?
Ну, наверное...
You know, possibly the issues that have to do with the dismantling of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Actions should not be viewed starting with this session of the General Assembly. The issue started way back, 18 months ago, when the U.S. decided unilaterally to exit out of this agreement endorsed by the UN Security Council. Since it was endorsed, it became part of the international law. And the U.S. Said that they prohibit everyone else to execute this plan and trade with Iran in particular. There will be sanctioned against. I believe that these are detrimental actions, not only considering the Iranian nuclear program, but is also detrimental to the non-proliferation regime and to overall situation in the region. Unfortunately, our U.S. colleagues, as for all aspects of North Africa and Middle East region, they view it all through Iranian prism, as if they're trying to consciously find more reasons in order to try to support their hard-to-support statements saying that Iran is the main source of evil in that region and all bad things come from Iran. Our concept in this regard has to do with the fact to use the experience of the rest of the world, for example, Europe, where back in the day, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe started, and that led to the signing of Helsinki Final Act. And that led to adoption many important declarations at the highest level. I spoke about them. That is the European Security Charter and the Platform for Security based on cooperation. That was back in 1999. And those documents have promoted the principles of dialogue, consideration of mutual interests, preparedness to discuss concerns, and the most important thing, not to undertake the steps that would infringe on other partners. So no one would improve their security by infringing on others, on security of others. That is the logic behind our initiative, the concept of security in the Persian Gulf. We have promoted this initiative back in the day when it was still possible to prevent that exacerbation of tensions that we see right now. Unfortunately, not all coastal countries of the Gulf did agree to do preventative actions. They said, yes, this is a good idea, we could study it, but let's wait, let this idea mature. But now I think it's overripened now. And considering that more and more countries of the Persian Gulf, including, of course, the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, they're starting to think on how to de-escalate this situation. That speaks in favor of the fact that the ideas that we are promoting, they'll be in demand. And I'll say once again, they are very simple: to sit down at the negotiation table and start talking to each other without using the mouthpieces and mass media, but to lay down the foundation in a business-like manner without trying to coordinate with the public opinion and try to find the satisfaction of all participants of this process. I hope that at some point in time such a process will start. We believe that besides the countries of the Gulf, there was room for participation for P5, for example, as facilitating sides, as well as League of Arab States, Islamic Cooperation Organization, maybe the EU. It is also showing the interest towards this region of the world. And in the future, if such a process could come to life, these principles and approaches could be expanded to other countries of the Middle East and North Africa, where we see that there is more and more need for a reliable and inclusive security system.
Спасибо, Сергей Викторович.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. How did you talk with Pompeo went on today? Did you talk about strategic stability? What did you come to? And also, Pompeo has tweeted that Russia and the U.S. have to find a constructive way. What did you think? Are these just beautiful words? Yet another beautiful words? Well, we discussed a wide array of issues. We had a report for mass media that was, we discussed strategic stability in all of its dimensions. We also spoke about conflicts taking place in the Middle East and North Africa, that they are remaining there, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan. We also spoke about the issue of North Eastern Asia, considering the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula, and we also talked about our bilateral affairs. Also, following up on those talks that took place between our presidents, including the latest talk in Osaka during G20. Also, in July, there was a telephone conversation between the presidents. Throughout these talks, Russia has promoted the ideas of move on by creating additional channels of cooperation, including business communities, entrepreneurs from both countries, also other issues, for example, so that U.S. and Russia could ensure facilitating the solutions, creating, for example, an expert council of outstanding statesmen, former military and diplomats, intelligence services. All this is on the table, as well as those suggestions that I have mentioned today in my speech, so that after the dismantling of the, unfortunately, of the New START treaty, we could think about the moratorium of deploying such type of missiles and making such promises. We could think on how of prolonging the limitations of strategic offensive arms. Pompeo did express preparedness to discuss this, but he said that it's hard to do that between the two of us, and he said that we should expand the framework. We will not be against any formats, with an understanding that all participants that the U.S. would like to invite to the table will respond to this invitation. However, our position is that the agreement on strategic offensive arms that is running out of time in January 2021, in any case, it should be prolonged in order just to have certain reliable instrument in strategic stability. And I hope that we'll continue our discussion with our American colleagues. As for strategic stability, well, we spoke in this dimension, but I'd like to highlight that the response was not a negative one. We also spoke about our bilateral issues when there are so many triggers there. They have accumulated so that our deputies or directors of the departments of our ministries and State Department, they meet every year 2 times, and we have different demands and issues, concerns. About 98% come from our side, so we cannot find any solutions to them. I spoke about this outrageous situation about basically visa denied to a significant number of Russian delegation, 13 people, I think, if we take the overall number. And as I said when I just arrived on that day, when I was asked, I said, I have no doubts that neither President Trump, nor State Secretary Pompeo have nothing to do with that, and Mr. Pompeo has confirmed that. Then the question arises, who's making these decisions that go right in hand with Washington's obligations to ensure a normal functioning of the UN headquarters? And the second idea here, well, you have to understand that when such emergencies happen, then those executors who allow such things to happen, I believe that take decisions considering the overall sentiment in the relations, and this sentiment is being created by the American political class. When there are daily and even hourly new sanctions, accusations of Russia of all cardinal sins. And Nancy Pelosi said today that behind the incident that is being blown out of proportion around the telephone conversation between President Trump and President Zelensky, that it was Russia behind that all, and it was contorted by that. It's paranoia. It's apparent when serious politicians, and therefore pretending to be serious mass media, they're trying to fluctuate all that around the world, then the functionary who was tasked with giving the visa, he would think, oh, let's be on the safe side and not give a visa. So we have to analyze that in a comprehensive manner to normalize the overall sentiments, and that will be easier to get back U.S.-Russian relations back to the stage where everyone expects, actually, from all of our partners and and developing countries and Europe. We've heard such wishes coming from them. Thank you. Mr. Lavrov.
Jim Bays, Al Jazeera. Господин министр, вопрос о Сирии, формирование нового конституционного комитета. Ваша реакция на это и с учетом того, что это в резолюции 2254, которая призывает к справедливым и свободным выборам. Видите ли вы перспективы полной демократии и свободных выборов в Сирии, чего не было после того, как семья Асада заняла это 50 лет тому назад, пришла к власти?
на создание
Well, I don't know whom to talk about the reaction to the Constitution Committee, because we took part actively in forming that committee. Unlike other participants who were trying to block and to drag out its creation, the committee would have been created back in December if it were not for their efforts. We know who tried to block this work. Well, we were not offended. We were just continued to facilitate the Syrian government and the opposition in their tries to find agreed approaches. I'm very thankful to Secretary General Guterres, as well as Special Envoy Geir Pedersen, that they were trying to be very diplomatic and very delicate about chaperoning this process, and they indeed helped Iran, Turkey, and Russia as guarantor states of the Astana format, how to agree with the sides, how to find an agreeable list and appropriate rules of procedure. Secretary General has announced that within a month, I believe they want to call the first session of the Constitutional Committee in Geneva, and we welcome that. Now, my main message to everyone is that I'm satisfied with the fact that the inhibition of this process was stopped, because this was aimed to thwart any Syrian settlement that was aimed at provoking confrontation, scandals, and tensions in this process in order to point the blame finger at you-know-who and to give a justification to the use of force, yet another use of force. And I'm happy that the reason has gained the upper hand among our Western partners who are the so-called participants of anti-terrorist coalition. And we also discussed that with Secretary Pompeo today. I think we're trying to get to better understanding on how to help Syrians to agree about the future of their motherland, so that all external players, with no exclusion, will respect territorial integrity of Syrian Arab Republic. As for the UN Security Council resolution, it's much wider, the 2254 resolution. It also mentions the need to conduct free and fair elections under the supervision of the UN, with the help of the UN. And the elections should be such as all Syrians could take part in that. They also have other ideas there. They need to develop constitutional reform, and that should be before the elections. We know about certain ideas that are running simultaneous with the constitution, and regardless of when it will happen, try to fight for another election. There'll be yet another provocation, and I assure you that such ideas would only block the progress that we are just starting to get, and it will block further agreements between the Syrians. It should all be done step by step and incrementally. When everyone wants all and right now, and if not, then we'll bomb, I don't think that's in line with the interests of any country in the region, including Syrian neighbors. And also, don't forget that the resolution 2254 clearly states the need for an uncompromised fight against terrorism. We should also not forget about it. We should not disregard it and leave it out of the context of discussion on the implementation of 2254.
So, Sergey, once again, good afternoon. RT in New York, just two questions, one professional and one more personal. First of all, the first question, this week, earlier, you said that you are for renewing the air transportation between Russia and Georgia. When could we expect actions, and what kind of actions that would be? And what can you say about the news that the air communications with Ukraine can be restored too? And secondly, They say that when you were in the United Nations, you often smoked in the building and even had to pay fines. And have you done this time and paid any fines? I've never paid any fines. These are some tales, some legends are being born. We proceed based on all of the decisions made by the General Assembly on the rules of conduct in different parts of the headquarters and its parts. And as far as Georgia is concerned, well, you know, when we made this decision to stop the air connections as a result of the indignating actions of the opposition in the Orthodox meeting, and there was violence against our deputies, and we said that it was a temporary measure and that we will cancel this measure once the situation normalizes and when the authorities will understand the importance of preventing, curbing such incidents. And yesterday, or the day before yesterday, well, while I was here, yesterday or the day before yesterday, we had a meeting with the Georgian Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's asked about it. He asked for this meeting, and then I read his comments, which actually covered more time than the meeting actually took. And he was interested in the timeline of renewing this communications, and we said that we never looked for any artificial reasons for grudges with Georgia, and if the authorities can responsibly promote its position towards responsible relations with Russia and will not be proceeding from the problems that the new president is trying to use again, I would personally restore these air communications. And the comments regarding this meeting, of course, make me smile and leave me puzzled. I mean, the comments made by the Georgians themselves. Minister Osipov, Komsomolskaya Pravda, it just coincided that just a few days before your visit to New York, they allowed to come to the States to the family of Viktor But. And did you manage to, on the margins of this assembly, and to talk about this issue of the Russian citizens? The issue of Mr. But, we raised this issue in our every contact with the American side, and I've talked about a long list of triggers in our relations, which we often repeatedly pass to our American colleagues. This concerns Mr. Butov and Yeroshenko and Maria Butina and other citizens of Russia which were captured fraudulently or somehow by other means in foreign countries. And of course, this is a priority for us. And today I reminded Mike Pompeo about these concerns of ours which call for attention. It's great that the wife and daughter of Viktor Butov were allowed to come here. It's a very humane act, but the fact that it happened over numerous years, that he spent in prison based on some doubtful allegations, this is not something we're content with, and we hope that justice will be done. And as far as Lavrov is concerned, when I was in Kuwait, I worked on this along the lines of peace actions and with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they assure us that this topic is being dealt with actively, and they have some procedural issues, but the issue is very clear for us. It has to be solved, as we've been promised by our Kuwait friends. And you know that in this respect we have support from our colleagues in the UK, in the US, and this is a powerful collective signal, and we hope that it will yield results.
I'd like to ask you about your planned visit to Iraq, which is what are the objectives of your visit to Iraq? And you will also visit the Kurdistan region. You will go to Erbil and Baghdad, from my understanding. And Iraq is a big buyer of Russian weapon, and also there are oil investment of Russia in Iraq. Is Russia planning to expand those interests and military cooperation with Iraq, especially given this current tension in the region?
У нас с Ираком
We have very good relationship with Iraq. Good cooperation in various fields, including energy, economics, as well as the sphere of strengthening the defense capacity of the Iraq security forces, which still need help in fighting terrorism, and terrorists have caused great damage in Iraq, and the remnants of those gangs still sometimes organize terrorist attacks. And we will be ready to discuss everything that will be in the interest of the Iraq authorities, and our petroleum companies will see the benefits in the projects which can be considered. And as far as the situation is concerned, in general, the visit to Iraq in general, I will use the procedure that our American colleagues apply, that they do not announce that beforehand. So let's wait a bit.
My question is on Venezuela. I wanted to ask you earlier this week, President Trump met with dozens of Latin American leaders, as well with members of the Venezuelan opposition. They did comment on more sanctions towards the government of Nicolás Maduro, more sanctions for his entourage, for his government. But they did not, or they failed to comment on alleged ties between the leader of the opposition, Juan Guaidó, and local drug cartels. That's after we saw pictures of Mr. Guaidó with local drug traffickers. I wanted to ask you, do you think that UN should react to this, to somebody with this background potentially becoming the president of Venezuela? And I also wanted to ask you, there's been information suggesting that you met with some of the delegation of the opposition in Venezuela. Did you do that? And finally, do you think there's still time for dialogue between the opposition and the government in Venezuela? Спасибо.
Знаете, ну, насчет первого,
Well, as far as the first question is concerned, the photos and who shook his hand and when it happened, to be honest, this is on the level of those lamentable discussions which they organize in the US, using every pretext, who called whom, who told about it to whom, and whether they had the right to tell or not. I proceed from the idea that the UN has to work on serious issues, and as far as Venezuela is concerned, the most serious, the most important thing is to protect the UN Charter, which requires all countries to respect the territorial integrity, the sovereignty of all countries, not to apply force and not to threaten to use force, and which also requires peaceful resolution of all disputes. So, whether I believe or not that this settlement is still possible, today I met with the executive vice president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela, Jorge Arreaza, and they are ready to have dialogue with the opposition in order to find reconciliation on the national level, and they're ready for it. And the representatives of Mr. Guaidó changed their position day overnight. First, they turned out all proposals. First, Guaidó said that he needs no proposals from CARICOM, from Montevideo mechanism. Then he established dialogue between his representatives and the representatives of the government, the so-called Oslo process. And now the Oslo process, the government, as the representatives are just mentioned, the representatives of the Venezuelan government are ready to participate in this mechanism. But Guaidó and his company explained that he's not an independent figure. He always gets the tips what he should do in the crisis in order to increase tensions, heat up the atmosphere, to talk about the Monroe Doctrine application, to trigger the mechanism which is called Inter-American Treaty of Reciprocal Assistance, the Rio Treaty of the 1940s, and the countries that use this mechanism discuss the possibility of military interaction in Venezuela. Of course, I cannot decide for sovereign states. We do not intervene in their affairs, but I feel that if this happens, the people of all Latin America, the majority of the population of Latin America will just be indignated. They will be just coming back to the period of 200 years back. And you also asked about this meeting with a Mr. who Juan Guaido appointed to some position. I remember that his name starts with a B. And he claimed that he had talked to me, that he met with me. This is a lie. And this bad example is contagious. For example, when fake news all over the world, starting with the US, spread out all over the world in order to plan some political action, this is contagious. And they learn from Americans to introduce a lie and then try to use this lie to show that Russia has abandoned the Venezuelan government. This is low and unworthy of a man.
Thank you, sir. George Baumgarten, correspondent for Jewish newspapers in North America and other media as far afield as Kazakhstan. There have been a lot of coverage in this country, in the United States, both in the general media and the specifically Jewish media, about your country's growing relationship with Israel. I believe Mr. Netanyahu has made at least one recent visit to meet with President Putin. Can you tell me, sir, how you view this growing relationship and how you see it developing? Thank you. Спасибо.
This is not the only visit we received from Netanyahu, not his first meeting with President Putin this year. They have a very good, friendly relationship based on trust, and we see Israel as a strategic country. And there are almost 1.5 million people which are originally from the USSR or the Russian Federation, and they have parties like Our Home is Israel, which are mainly aimed at Russian-speaking electorate. And of course, we are not indifferent to the security of Israel, especially taking into account the horrible tragedy that the Jewish population had to live through during the World War II, called Holocaust. We remember everything that happened then towards the Jewish nation when it had to be saved. And this includes in huge quantities it was being saved by the Russian army, by the Red Army. And the fact that the Israeli state remembers this, not just remembers it, but cherishes the memory of those actions is very different from how our less civilized partners desecrate memorials and burial grounds and try to forget Holocaust. This is a very important detail. And when they promote their version of the World War II, when they promote their version who started it, whose fault it was, and compare communism with Nazism, with fascism, these are the people who demolish the memorials to the victims of Holocaust, and you can make your own conclusions how they were brought up and how we should approach them. And actually in Israel, they inaugurated a great memorial to Soviet soldiers who won in the World War II. And in January, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, there will be a memorial to the victims of the blockade in Leningrad. This event will coincide with yet another anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, 27th of January. This is the day of remembrance of the victims of Holocaust, and President Putin received an invitation to attend this event, and this includes the inauguration of the museum dedicated to the victims of the blockade of Leningrad. And as far as historical, spiritual ties are concerned, this is that. And we also have great economic ties and good dialogue on the Middle Eastern issues. So this includes Syria and other countries of the region, because in all our approaches we always underscore that complex, comprehensive decision solutions have to take into consideration the interests of security of Israel. This is a principled approach, and unfortunately we cannot get out of this dead end where the Palestinian issue is being tugged into, and this has a negative effect on the overall situation. This includes the interest of Israel.
Mr. Lavrov, good afternoon. Carrie Naughton from French newspaper Le Monde. This morning we've heard Pakistan Prime Minister Khan calling the international community for help in Kashmir, especially after Indian PM Modi has broken the constitutional autonomy of Kashmir back in August. He even said he was warning that this could be a dangerous escalation between two countries which hold the nuclear power. So has the international community evoked Kashmir during this 74th GA, and what would be your answer to PM Khan as you're presiding the Security Council?
Я встречался.
Yesterday I met with the Prime Minister Imran Khan, and we talked about the Kashmir issue, and we strongly reiterated the need of a direct dialogue between India and Pakistan. In the 70s and 80s, they signed corresponding documents in Lahore and Sindh, and those declarations, these agreements are still in force. And just like other numerous countries, we are all for those documents, and that based on those documents, the countries look for mutually acceptable agreements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foreign Minister. This is Mushfiqul Fazal. I'm working for Just News BD as a Bangladeshi news outlet. My question on Bangladesh and Rohingya issues. Bangladesh is in difficult situation with million Rohingya. Country itself is in problematic position in terms of economic, social, and democratic rights. Can you mediate with the both authorities to send them back with proper dignity, as both authoritarian regime are close allies of Russia?
Это не...
This is not an issue that can be resolved all of a sudden, just if Russia begins to act as a mediator. Nobody asked us for it. There's a general understanding, including as a result of the discussion at the Security Council, that the people have to be returned, and for this there's a need to provide certain conditions. And in this respect, you should work with the UN Agency for Refugees and have a dialogue on all technical issues, including the places where those refugees could go back to, and guaranteeing their security, their safety. That's basically all. And just like in any other case, it calls for calm, trustful bilateral work and attempts to publicly increase attention to it, and those attempts often have some increased nature, and they just make both sides less ready for a dialogue. So dialogue, and once again dialogue. There is no magical secret apart from what I just mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister. Betül Yürük, Turkish news agency Anadolu. Turkey has been negotiating the creation of a safe zone with the United States for some time. Can you tell us what Russia's position is on that? And a follow-up, if I may. The U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, James Jeffrey, said that the Syrian government was still trying to win a military victory. And then he said the Constitutional Committee at this stage was symbolic. What is your response to that? Thank you.
Ну, я не могу комментировать.
Well, I cannot comment on what Mr. Jeffrey says. Our American colleagues, and we keep in close touch with them, but their comments, or take Syria or any other conflict, they're changing daily, considering the sentiment and political climate that's existing right that day. So I will not comment on that. The Syrian government was accused of not wanting to adopt the 2254 resolution. Later, they were accused of supporting the results of the Syrian National Congress that Russia, with the support of Turkey and Iran, has held in January 2018 in Sochi. And that became the breakthrough stage in efforts on trying to move on to real work and not just beautiful words on political settlement. It was at the Sochi Congress of Syrian National Dialogue that those parameters were defined that became the basis for creation of Constitutional Committee. And the term Constitutional Committee was used for the first time, as well as the rules of procedure. It was also said that the Syrian government does not want to support that document, just like before they were said that they didn't want to support the 2254 resolution. And that's not true, because Damascus has supported the 2254 resolution, as well as the declaration of the Sochi Syrian National Congress, as well as all follow-up actions that were defined by the agenda set out by the Astana three states. And those actions were aimed at ensuring the fully fledged political process in Geneva with the good services of the UN. What else is Syrian government is refusing to do? If Mr. Jeffrey believes is that the Syrian government is betting on a military victory, I do not know of that. The Syrian government has been trustworthy in confirming all of their commitments, also during the UN Security Council sessions dedicated to Syria. If, as many US are trying to do that, if they believe that they want to bet on military solution, and by that they mean that the Syrian army, using our support, will be uncompromising in finishing off all of the rest of the terrorists, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that some were trying to present as a moderate group. That is just nefarious use, or rather distortion of facts. No one, and never, did not compare fight against terrorism and military solution to the conflict. Armed opposition is a party to the process that is being called the Astana process. They're a party to the agreement of creating a constitutional committee. And the first question was about the Turkish-American negotiations. Well, if there are Turkish-American negotiations, well, of course we talk about that in our relations both with Turkey and the US. For one main and very important reason, all that is happening on the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic. Both Turkey and the United States have solemnly signed many documents, and they voted for the resolutions where it is clearly stated that we all have to respect sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. And for this standpoint, we're not indifferent to the solution on this topic. About 20 years ago, there was an add-on agreement between Syria and Turkey, and that reflected the concerted mechanism between two countries that allowed to ensure security around the border. I don't think there was an issue to use the same basis, using the mutually acceptable solutions for neighboring countries, in this regard Turkey and Syria, to agree on how to ensure the security of the. And that desire of Ankara is very justified, because indeed they are suffering from the infiltration of terrorists coming from the territory controlled by the US right now. And the third aspect of this issue is also connected to the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic. To a large extent, Kurds are involved in that issue. And how they're being used by the Americans, what kind of role they're being given, including some tangible steps on to get these territories ready for Kurds living there, creating bodies for self-governance, and nothing like that is happening in the rest of Syria to the west of the Euphrates River. They're hearing our calls, trying to create some points for refugees so they could return to. They're saying, no, first we should have the process. And when it will be clear that the political process has gained momentum, then we can think of that. But on the east of the Euphrates, no one is waiting for the political process. The money is being popped into, and all the territories are being prepared for the local population, for example, healthcare services, education, and water, electricity. And Arab tribes have been very puzzled by that. They traditionally lived on the eastern bank of the Euphrates, and part of the territories where they used to live traditionally. Now the U.S. Making some steps that are not being liked by the tribes. That's a very dangerous situation. And of course, we believe that the Kurd issue should be solved within the framework of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. We believe that that should be an issue for negotiations, including the leadership of Syria. When the U.S. and Turkey will confirm to us the commitment to sovereignty and territorial integrity, we'll not also keep it in mind, but rather use it as criteria for evaluating all of the east of the Euphrates actions.
Hello. Me. Yeah, Mr. Lavrov. Yes, here, Stefano Vacca.
Thank you. It's my question.
Me?
Thank you very much. Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Mr. Minister, you spoke today about the double standard and using the international law at will of some Western countries that we can choose. You also, your country is now supporting Israel. And you know it is in violation of international law. You know it's taking the Palestinian land. You know it's building settlement and building a wall on Palestinian land, putting thousands of people in prison. And you have warm relation with Israel. And Mr. Abbas wanted to expand on those mediators, not only to keep it with the US. US has lost its role as a mediator. Why you don't step forward and do something about the question of Palestine, using this leverage on the warm, because of the warm relations with Israel? Can you use that to really step into the peace process? Thank you.
Во-первых, я уже сказал.
Well, first of all, I have already said that fact that all these games around the Palestinian issue, the promises of the deal of the century, proposals of certain 50 billion so that the refugees do not return to Palestine. An attempt to first to try to get to Arab countries to normalize relations with Israel and only then to solve Palestinian issue. And that is directly contradicting the Arab Peace Initiative. Right now, all that brings if not already, has brought Palestinian-Israeli settlement into a stalemate. And I'm positive, and I have said that during my intervention at the General Assembly, that is not in Israel's interests and in no one's interest, because only two-state solution, only the creation of the Palestinian state that was promised 70 years ago could ensure stability in that region and could alleviate the acuteness of that problem, including cutting down the opportunities of extremists trying to recruit Arab youth. And we're talking to that, honestly, with Israelis. Unfortunately, the U.S. course of action of doing that independently remains still in demand. I have met with Abu Mazen here at the UN General Assembly. He did not express any concerns, saying that Russia is not doing enough to find the solution to get this process out of the dead end. I think that if we take all things, with all things considered, this comprehensive array of issues that define the current state of Palestinian-Israeli settlement, it is very apparent, very clear, and the most simple step, however counterintuitive it seems, that will be to bring back Palestinian unity. This Fatah and Gaza and Hamas, they all have external allies, those who support them, and these are different countries. But still, they are Palestinians, all of them, and uniting their front, bringing back the unity of Palestinian administration, holding elections, building cooperation, that would strengthen Palestinian positions at the negotiations and at the global arena multiple times, and that depends only on them and on the Arabs, and mostly on no one else. The incapability to do that is playing into the hands of those who say, who do we talk to? There is not one team of negotiators. So all that is not the very correct way to depict that. But I'm telling you the viewpoint of those who do not want to get a settlement and how they see the situation. And Russia, several times has held inter-Palestinian meetings, including Islam Jihad, Hamas, and Fatah. About 12 or 15 delegations came over. We tried to provide our platform for them to agree through dialogue on how to rebuild the unity between themselves. We have provided declarations and statements, but it did not move beyond that. I believe that's a very important work on the Palestinian issue, and we actively support the efforts of those countries who try to facilitate Palestinian unity. I'd like to highlight Egypt's efforts and some other countries as well.
Thank you, Minister. I have two questions for you. Before your meeting with Secretary... Oh, sorry. Carolyn with CNN. Before your meeting with Secretary Pompeo, it was reported that you had said to the press that there would be a surprise response because members of your delegation were not given visas. Does that still stand? And secondly, in a phone call with press this morning, a spokesperson from your office said that Russia would not want transcripts of phone calls between President Putin and President Trump released. Is this a concern of yours? And are there any other concerns you have from the domestic turmoil going on in the U.S. currently?
You know, as for the first question, I have stated that publicly at the session the day before yesterday at the conference dedicated to entry into force on comprehensive test ban treaty. I have commented that to the media, and I spoke about that. I talked about that with Mike Pompeo yesterday and today. I'd like to say once again that I have no doubt that neither he nor President Trump did not know about that, and they did not give the order not to give the visa, and my colleague has confirmed it to me. Of course, we cannot leave that without a response. We will consider that, of course, next time when New York or elsewhere in the U.S. territory, international events will take place. We will confirm and reconfirm and check and recheck how the officials that issue visa have instructions from State Department. Any additional measures, I don't want to mention that right now. Unfortunately, we have a lot of issues with the U.S. We never want to act this eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth in that fashion. However, leaving some things without response, what Obama administration did back in the day when they have hijacked our diplomatic property on the U.S. territory, we could not just tolerate that. We did the same thing to the U.S. property. In the country where the Constitution states, and in many laws it is stated, that private property is sacred, doing such things, raiding, that's not worthy of the U.S. as a great power, not worthy of American nation with its great democratic and law-abiding traditions. That's simply unworthy. And this Yahoo website all of a sudden decided to think about, to remember how Obama took our property. And they gave a new sensation that it was done because these compounds near Washington and near New York, they were spy nests. That's just indecent. It's all very indecent. We want to get it all back within the normal course. As for our diplomats working in the US and the US diplomats working in the Russian Federation, it does not all depend on us, but we'll try to find some stimulating measures. But the first question was about what? Now, as for the transcripts of phone conversation, you know, my mom was bringing me up, and she said that reading other people's letters is inappropriate and it's indecent, and I believe that's the thing to do, because letters of two people elected by their nations to be at the helm of the country, there are traditions, there are manners, including diplomatic manners, that suppose a certain level of confidentiality. They suppose a certain agreement in these issues. I do not comment on who was making the decision about publishing this transcript of a phone conversation of the president of U.S. and the Ukraine. Once again, I'd like to say that there is a diplomatic routine idea, and bringing all of the issues to the public, being so vociferous, saying that this or other administration, if they don't show a certain memo, a memo to relatives, to some partners, then this administration will be brought to its knees. That's what kind of democracy is that? How can you work in such conditions? So we'll follow the spirit and the letter of Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. It is all clearly stated there. And I suggest that mass media, who are so vocal in trying to learn can they publish something else, I suggest you check these documents, very important documents that facilitate diplomatic relations. Thank you so much.
Libya attacks. And Libya.
Да, ребята.